Welcome to video 1A. In this video, we're going to learn how to determine if something is living or non-living. So first, our question of the day is, what is biology? So you can look at that word and maybe you can break it into two parts. You have bio and logi. And bio refers to life, and logi would be the study of something. So biology is the study of life. So since we're studying what life is, we need to know what makes something living. So first, we need to know that if something is living, what we mean by living is that it is living or it once lived. Anything that's non-living has never lived. So a living thing could be a raccoon that is alive, or a raccoon that has been run over by a car and it's now dead. We still put it in the living category because it once lived. Or wood. Wood comes from a tree, so since it once lived, we put in the living category. Non-living would be something like a rock or asphalt or maybe oxygen. And we go ahead and put it in the non-living category because it's not something that recently died. Okay, and now if it's going to go in the living category, so all living things have these characteristics. We have 8 characteristics here. You need to be able to understand what they mean, recognize them from a list, and so if I gave you a list of any number of characteristics, you could decide, yes, that's one of the 8 characteristics, or no, it isn't. And also on your own, you need to be able to write the characteristics. You need to be able to write several of the characteristics. So for honors, I'm going to ask that you can come up with 8 of them. For regular bio, I'm going to say come up with 5 on your own for the test. Maybe 4 for the quiz, 5 for the test. Okay, so first, living things grow and develop, just like a baby grows and develops and it changes over time, or maybe a cell gets larger, it reproduces. So they could have offspring or babies, or maybe 2 cells could, a bacterium could undergo binary fission and it splits in 2. Living things use nutrients and energy. So we eat food. Plants would take in carbon dioxide, and they also take in a lot of fertilizers. They take in nitrogen and phosphorus. And both plants and animals would use energy. All living things do use energy in one way or another. Living things respond to the environment. So maybe the temperature of the environment or the moisture in the environment. All living things have cells and DNA. Living things evolve, and in science, when we say something evolves, we mean that the population of that thing is going to change over time. So maybe the population of bears changes over time, so that more of the bears become brown bears instead of white bears. And so in order to evolve, you need to have DNA, and the DNA would change over time because the DNA is the directions for the living things. So if something doesn't have DNA, it's not going to evolve. Living things breathe and excrete. So they have some kind of gas exchange, whether they're taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide like we do, or taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen, which is the net exchange for a plant. And the last one is living things maintain homeostasis, which means they maintain some sort of equilibrium. So they find they have a set maybe temperature or a set amount of moisture they can have, and they have to go back to that set amount. So if they get too hot, there's a way they cool down. For us, we get too hot and we sweat. We get too cool and we shiver. For cells, if they have too much water, maybe they would do something to regulate to get some of the water to leave their cell. Or if they don't have enough water in them, they'll do something to regulate so they can get more water in. So those are our 8. Okay, so living things have all of those characteristics. They have all 8. If you're looking at something and you know it's missing one or more characteristic, then that thing is not a living thing. It's non-living. So let's go ahead and try a few. So here's a picture of coral that you'd find like in a coral reef. Maybe you're scuba diving. What are some of the characteristics that this coral has? So if we look at our list, coral does grow and develop. It does reproduce. That's how it's going to have more growth of coral. it does use nutrients and energy. It responds to the environment. Right now, maybe you've heard of ocean acidification, and that's killing some of the coral. It's called coral bleaching. This one's probably hard for you at this point. You'd have to look it up probably, but coral does have cells. It does have DNA. And since it has DNA, it has the ability to evolve, and coral does evolve. Even though it's underwater, yes, it does breathe and excrete, just like fish can get oxygen from the water. And they do have to maintain a homeostasis. So, if you now know that coral has all of the characteristics of living things, are we going to call coral living or non-living? Of course, it has to be living. Next, we have stalactites. So go ahead and pause the video and figure out which characteristics you think stalactites have. Okay, so looking at our list, if we're looking at all these, stalactites, they do get bigger over time. You could argue that they reproduce because the stalactite is on the ceiling and then a stalagmite will grow up from the bottom. So you could argue reproduction. You can argue using nutrients because they are built of something, and so you could call that something a nutrient. Response to the environment, I would definitely say it does that, since they grow bigger when it rains more often. Stalactites definitely don't have cells or DNA, and so if they don't have DNA, they can't evolve. They don't breathe. They don't maintain homeostasis. Okay, so there we have. We only have 3 of the characteristics. So what does this tell you about a stalactite? It tells you the stalactite is non-living. Now we have fire. So, whoops, I already have the characteristics. So for fire, fire grows and develops. Okay, you can argue that it reproduces because the fire could split and another little fire breaks off. You could argue it uses nutrients and energy, since fire would burn something. You could argue that it responds to the environment for sure, because it rains and that could put the fire out. You can argue that fire breathes or excretes because it does use oxygen. So based off that, what would you say about fire? Hopefully you say that fire is non-living because it's definitely missing cells, it's missing DNA, it doesn't evolve, it's missing some of the characteristics. Okay, a virus is different. So this would be the kind of virus that we get in our bodies, and it would give us a cold, or maybe it would give somebody the chicken pox or the flu. So a lot of different illnesses are caused by viruses. And viruses are these simple little protein shells with a little bit of DNA or RNA inside, and then this little tail kind of helps them to spread, kind of like how a dandelion has the little fuzzy bits that'll help them fly off. So this would go from one person to another as they sneeze, and once this gets inside you, it's smaller than a cell. It would get into one of your cells, it would release this DNA, and then that DNA would take over your cell and use your cell in order to make more of the virus. So based off of what you know about a virus so far, go ahead and pause the video and try to figure out what characteristics a virus has. Okay, so let's talk about it. Do they grow and develop? I wouldn't say they grow and develop. They just stay as they are. They get into a person, it enters one cell, and then they make copies of the virus. So I don't think I would say it grows or develops. Reproduces? That's questionable. They don't reproduce themselves, but once they put their DNA into our cells, they use one of our cells to reproduce themselves. So in a way they reproduce, but they need a cell of a living thing in order to reproduce. It's also questionable if they use nutrients and energy. They themselves don't eat, but they enter our bodies and they use the parts, the nutrients that we have eaten. So they'll use what's in our body in order to build themselves. For example, they need protein. And so we eat protein, and then they'll use the bits of protein in us to make more of themselves. Respond to the environment. they would be able to travel more easily if you sneeze them out. Once they're inside a cell, they are going to respond to your cell. So kind of has cells and DNA. Well, they definitely don't have a cell, but they use our cells, and they definitely do have DNA or RNA. So they have some kind of directions. Evolve, they definitely evolve. Their DNA changes over time, and this is a real bummer for us because your immune system will learn how to fight a virus, and then the next year, there's a new cold for you to figure out how to fight because the virus changes all the time. For breathes and excretes, no, but they enter our cell and we breathe and excrete, and they take advantage of the work that our bodies are doing. And same with homeostasis. They themselves do not maintain homeostasis, but they rely on our cells to maintain homeostasis so they can replicate themselves. So based on this, what do you think? Do you think they are alive or not? Do you think they're living or not? And I'll tell you, this one is kind of up for debate. In our class, we're going to go and say they're not living, but they are so close. They're right on the border between living and non-living. They do so many of the things that living things do, but they use another living thing in order to do it. And this evolution is a big thing. So they're not really living, but you could argue they are. This is something where people don't really agree on this. Again, the whole world doesn't fit nice and neat into the two little categories we have. We try to make things fit into our categories of living or non-living, but it's not that simple. Okay, so the big takeaway is you need to know these characteristics. You need to know that living things are living or once living, and that living things have all the characteristics. Non-living things are missing one or more characteristic. I hope that helps you, and I'll see you in class.